right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to do section 9-5, but we're going to do part 2. And we're still looking at factoring basic polynomials. If you remember yesterday, we factored problems like this. I'm just going to go over the first one more time to kind of help you remember what we did. If you remember, we brought back that x. You had a worksheet on that a while back. And you'll notice the top part of the x, we have the 16, and that it says the product. If you remember, we got the number 16 because we took the a term, which was 1, and the c term, which was 16, and we multiplied them together to be able to get the 16. So you take the a term and the c term and you bring those together. Then what we did is we took that middle term, which was 10, that was our b, and we brought it down to the bottom part of that x. Right? Once we established that and got that set up, what we decided to do was we said, well, what two numbers, when I take their product, give me 16 and their sum is 10? And if you remember, we talked about 2 and 8, right? And remember, 2 and 8 can flip-flop. They can exchange each other, right? So then underneath the x, we're going to go 2 times 8, which is 16, and 2 plus 8 is 10. And you'll notice it works. If you'll also remember the other day, some students had trouble finding the numbers. What you can do, again, is you can kind of brainstorm. And if you've got 16, think of the factors of 16. I have 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4. And that kind of gave you the palette as to which numbers you should choose. Now, once we have that, what we're going to do is we're going to move to the boxes. You'll notice that x squared plus 10x plus 16 goes at a diagonal. Once we have that diagonal established, now we're going to take the 2 and the 8. I'm going to put 2 here, and I'm going to make it an x, so 2x, and the x is the variable that's within the problem. And then in the lower left-hand box, I'm going to put 8x. Now, again, those two can flip-flop in position. This is just what I chose, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to factor this. So what times what gives me x squared? Well, x and x. When I multiply those together, I get x squared. Then think to yourself, x times what gives me 2x? Well, x times 2 gives me 2x. And then the lower left, what times x gives me 8x? That would be 8. And you're going to notice that 8 times 2 is 16. So I believe I got my numbers right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it together. And I've got x plus 2, which is what I got from the top. And then I've got x plus 8, which is what I got from the side. And so I just factored it. Now, I can write it this way, or I can also write it like this. Both of those are correct answers. And you just factored your polynomial. Now, we've done this problem. We've done all the rest in this grouping. But today what we're going to do is we're going to look at part 2. And you're going to notice that it asks us to solve the equation. Right? I'm going to lighten this up just a little bit more because I think it'll be easier for you to see. So what I'm going to do is I got to make sure it's in standard form. And you'll notice it's not in standard form. Again, standard form just means my a term in my polynomial is positive. Okay? It's not a fraction. And all of my terms are to one side. And you'll notice that the 13 is not to one side. It's got to be on the other side. So I'm going to subtract 13 from both sides. And I end up with x squared minus 12x minus 13 equals 0. All right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my x. And I'm going to take 1, which is my a term, times negative 13, which is my c term, and I'm going to get negative 13. The lower now, I'm going to take my b term, which is my middle term, and that's negative 12. Now I need to think to myself, what two numbers, when I multiply them together, give me negative 13, and I add them together and I get negative 12, right? So, well, that's negative 13 and it's 1, and I'm going to prove it down below. Negative 13 times 1 gives me negative 13. Negative 13 plus 1 gives me negative 12, right? So I know that my numbers are correct. I'm going to put my answer in the diagonal. So I'm going to go x squared, negative 12x, negative 13, right? And then I'm going to put my two numbers that I did for my x, and I'm going to go negative 13x, and I'm going to put 1x. And that, again, is what I got from this. Okay? Now I'm going to factor. What times what gives me x squared? I get x and x. X times what gives me negative 13x? I've got negative 13. Okay? X times what gives me 1x, and that's 1. And of course, 1 times negative 13 gives me negative 13. So my factoring then gives me x minus 13 and x plus 1. Right? So now I factored it. But you'll notice that the problem didn't just ask me to factor it, it asked me to solve. And so what I'm going to do with this now, and this is the second part, this is the part that we didn't cover before, I'm going to take what my factor was, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. And you've done this before. We did it last chapter, actually. I'm going to go x minus 13, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. And I'm going to go x plus 1, and I'm going to also set that equal to 0. And I'm going to add 13. X gives me 13. I'm going to subtract 1. X is going to give me negative 1. And so this parabola, when it crosses the x-axis, is going to cross the x-axis at negative 1 and 13. And you just solved the polynomial. All right, so let's go to the last problem. All right, it says the bandage shown has the area of 16 square centimeters. Find the width of the bandage. So what I need to do is I need to find the area of this, and then what I need to do is I need to set it equal to 16, right? So let's take a look at this. If you take a look, it's all ready to go. I've got W and 3 right here, and if I multiply them together, I get 3W. And if I multiply W times W, I get W squared. And I multiply 3 times W, I get 3W. And we've done this before, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, right? And I'm going to set it equal to 16 because I found the area of it. Now I'm going to combine my like terms. So you'll notice that. Put the W squared out front. I'm going to add the 3W and 3W to make 6W. And I'm going to set that equal to 16. Again, I'm combining my like terms, and we've, of course, done this before. Now I'm going to put it in standard form. So I'm going to subtract my 16. W squared plus 6W minus 16 gives me 0. And now I'm ready to factor. So I've got my X, and I've got my boxes. Okay, I'm going to put my answer here. I'm going to put 1 times negative 16 is negative 16. My middle term down below would be 6. And I've got to think of two numbers. When I multiply them together, it will give me negative 16. And if I add them together, I get 6. So let's think about that. That would be 8 and negative 2. And let's make sure that that's right. So I'm going to go 8 times negative 2. That gives me negative 16. That's true. And 8 plus a negative 2 gives me 6. So I was right. Those work. Now I'm going to put them in my boxes. I got 8W, W because that is the variable in my problem, and negative 2W. All right, so now I've got to think to myself, how am I going to factor this? Well, what times what gives me W squared? It's W and W. W times what gives me 8W? That's 8. W times what gives me negative 2W? It's negative 2. And of course, negative 2 times 8 is negative 16. So my factor then would be W plus 8 and W minus 2. So I got my factoring done. And now comes that new step. I'm going to take those and set them equal to 0. And I'm going to split them off. W plus 8 equals 0. And W minus 2 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 8. I get W equals negative 8. I'm going to add my 2. W gives me 2. Now, I have two answers. My parabola crosses the x-axis at 2 and at negative 2. However, if I'm talking about the dimensions of a rectangle, which is what this bandage is, okay, can I have a negative 8 for width? Hopefully you say no. No, you can't. And that's what's asking me to do. So which number is the best, or which answer? Well, my answer is 2. It's not negative 8 because I can't have a negative number for a width. So this would be 2, and then the label would be centimeters. So this would be 2 centimeters. All right, this is it for today. Those are your notes. If you have any questions, make sure that you email me, and I will address them tomorrow when I get back to school.